sweet like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll. Show them all what I'm made of. Strut down the hall. Won't stop till I get enough.
All right, hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're looking at this wild situation that almost just went down between the U.S. and Colombia. It could have been a full-blown trade war, and it all happened so fast. It's breaking news, right from Reuters, published just a few hours ago on January 26th, 2025. And get this, it all comes back to President Trump's immigration policies.
Yeah, it was pretty tense there for a minute. Basically, President Trump threatened Colombia with some pretty serious penalties, all because of deportation flights.
So to really get why this escalated so quickly, we need to understand the moves President Trump's been making on immigration since taking office.
Oh, yeah, totally. I mean, we're talking declaring a national emergency at the border, sending in the military, limits on asylum. He even tried to restrict birthright citizenship. It's been a really aggressive approach.
And now he's using military planes for deportations, too. I mean, that's pretty unusual, right?
Yeah, really unusual. It definitely sends a message, but not everyone's happy about it. And that's what set off this whole thing with Colombia. They straight up refused to accept deportees arriving on U.S. military aircraft.
And I bet that refusal didn't go over well. It sounds like President Trump didn't hold back.
Oh, no, he didn't. He went right for the economic pressure. We're talking 25% tariff on all Colombian goods coming into the U.S., and he said it could jump to 50% within a week.
Whoa, 25%. That's huge.
Yeah.
Think about how much the price of coffee would jump, right? But it wasn't just tariffs, was it?
Nope. There were also threats of travel bans and visa revocations for Colombian government officials, and there were even hints about sanctions on their banking system. Plus, the U.S. immediately froze all visa processing at their embassy in Bogota.
So they really pulled out all the stops, trying to force Colombia's hand. But the thing is, this potential trade war, it actually didn't happen.
That's right. At the last minute, Colombia agreed to the U.S. terms.
Okay, so before we get into what that deal actually was and what it means, we have to understand just how much was at stake for both countries economically.
Absolutely. I mean, just to start, Colombia is the third largest U.S. trading partner in all of Latin America.
And for Colombia, the U.S. is their biggest trading partner, period. There's so much money going back and forth. In 2023 alone, their two-way trade totaled $33.8 billion. And the U.S. had a $1.6 billion surplus.
Exactly. So when you start talking about tariffs of 25%, maybe even 50%, you're talking about a huge hit to both economies. And it's not just about coffee either. Think about Colombian textiles, flowers, oil. And on the other side, U.S.-made electronics, vehicles, pharmaceuticals, all of that gets way more expensive for Colombian consumers.
So this wasn't just some kind of abstract diplomatic fight. This was about real money. Real jobs, potentially real hardship for a lot of people. Okay, so we've got this backdrop of U.S.-Colombian relations, and then this deportation flight issue blows up. I know Colombia's president, President Petro, had some strong words about the situation. What did he have to say?
Oh, he definitely did. President Petro came out really strongly against using military aircraft for deportations. He even compared it to Nazi Germany, which obviously ruffled some feathers.
Wow, that's a serious statement. But it sounds like he was making a point about how these deportations were being done.
Exactly. He wasn't saying no to taking back Colombian citizens. He was objecting to the way it was happening, the use of military force.
So what did he want instead?
He actually offered to send his own presidential plane to bring back the deported Colombians. He was emphasizing that he wanted them to return with dignity, humanely.
So it was this mix of condemning what he saw as bullying, but also a willingness to cooperate on his own terms.
Yeah, it's a really interesting dynamic, and it's important to remember that Colombia wasn't alone in pushing back on these U.S. deportation flights. Mexico also refused a U.S. military deportation flight just the week before.
So this wasn't just a one-time thing, this is a pattern.
Absolutely, and it really raises questions about how this is all going to play out in the future.
We were just talking about Colombia and Mexico pushing back against these U.S. military deportation flights. But, that wasn't the only time things got a little heated over these deportations.
You're right. Brazil had a pretty strong reaction, too, especially with how their citizens were being treated during the deportation process.
Yeah, I remember reading something about Brazilian deportees being handcuffed on a flight back from the U.S. What exactly happened there?
Well, it seems there was a commercial flight full of Brazilian deportees, and they were all handcuffed for the whole flight. The Brazilian government was not happy about it at all. They condemned it as degrading treatment and called for an immediate investigation.
Wow, that's intense. Did the U.S. have any response?
Not really an official one, but it got so much attention that Brazil's president Lula da Silva got involved personally.
You did. What did he do?
So the flight had a stopover in Manaus, Brazil, and President Lula da Silva basically ordered that the handcuffs be removed from the deportees while they were on Brazilian soil.
That's a pretty powerful statement. It's like he was saying, look, we're not going to tolerate this kind of treatment of our citizens, even if they are being deported.
Exactly. And we have to remember, this isn't happening in isolation. This is all part of this bigger trend of increasing tensions between the U.S. and Latin America, especially when it comes to Trump's immigration policies.
You mentioned that earlier,
What?
that this wasn't an isolated incident. What's the bigger picture here?
Well, you have to consider the historical context. The U.S. has this long and complicated history with Latin America. It goes all the way back to the Monroe Doctrine in the 1800s.
The Monroe Doctrine,
Yeah.
That's the one where the U.S. basically said the entire Western Hemisphere was their territory, right?
Right, and that kind of backyard mentality has led to a lot of interventions over the years, both military and economic. So there's already this tension, this feeling among many Latin American countries that the U.S. acts like a bully in the region.
And then Trump comes in with his really strong stance on immigration, and it just makes things worse.
You could say that. When you combine that history with these current policies, it's a recipe for a volatile situation. And this deportation deal with Colombia, even though it avoided a trade war, it's likely to have ripple effects throughout Latin America.
So where do you see this going? What are the potential consequences of all this, besides the economic impact?
Well, the first thing to think about is if this sets some kind of precedent. If the U.S. can pressure Colombia into accepting these deportation flights, what's to stop them from doing the same thing with other countries?
Right, it could be like a domino effect. If one country gives in, others might feel like they have to as well.
Exactly. And that could lead to the U.S. basically dictating immigration policy to a whole bunch of countries in the region, even if those policies are unpopular or go against those countries' own interests.
That's a scary thought. But wouldn't some countries fight back? Surely not everyone will just go along with whatever the U.S. wants.
Of course, there'll be some pushback. Some countries might be more willing to stand up to the U.S., especially if they have strong alliances in the region or if they're not as dependent on the U.S. economically.
So we could see some countries siding more with the U.S. and others forming groups to resist the U.S.
It's definitely possible. And that kind of geopolitical maneuvering could have all sorts of unpredictable consequences.
It's a lot to think about. You know, we've been focusing on the economic and political side of all this, but at the end of the day, this is about people's lives.
Yeah.
These deportations are separating families, sending people back to countries they might have left years ago.
You're absolutely right. We can't forget the human cost of all of this. And it's not just the emotional impact. There are ethical and legal questions, too.
Like what?
Well, for one, are these deportees getting due process? Do they have access to lawyers? Are they being treated humanely during the deportation process? These are all things we need to be asking.
And then what about when they get back to their countries? Are they being sent back to safe places? Or are they being sent back to places where they might be persecuted or face violence or even death?
Those are really important questions, and unfortunately, we don't always have the answers. It's easy to get caught up in the political and economic debates, but we have to remember that there are real people at the center of this story.
Absolutely. It's so easy to forget that when we're talking about immigration as this abstract idea. But these are people with families and dreams and fears, and their lives are being turned upside down by these policies.
Exactly. And that's something we need to remember as we try to understand this complicated and often heartbreaking situation.
You know, what strikes me is how much this whole deportation situation has just gotten such strong reactions. And not just from governments, but from people, too.
Yeah, for sure. Public opinion plays a big role in all of this. You can't really separate the policy decisions from how people feel, both in the U.S. and Latin America.
It feels like this issue kind of gets at some really big questions, you know, like, what does it mean to be American? What are our responsibilities to people from other countries? How do we balance national security with just basic compassion?
Yeah, those are the tough ones. And there aren't any easy answers. There are really strong arguments on both sides.
So what are you hearing from the people who support these stricter deportation policies?
Well, a lot of them are worried about the rule of law. They feel like if you don't enforce immigration laws, it weakens the whole system. They say uncontrolled immigration puts a strain on resources, leads to Americans losing jobs, and even increases crime.
So it's about protecting what they see as theirs. Like they're afraid American culture is being threatened.
Exactly. And it's a powerful feeling, especially when the economy is uncertain or when people feel like their communities are changing too fast.
But then on the other side, you have people who are really upset about these deportations. What are they saying?
They see it as inhumane, plain, and simple. They argue that a lot of these people being deported are running from violence, poverty, things they can't control. They point out that America has always been a country built by immigrants and that we have a duty to help people in need.
So it's this clash between being tough and being compassionate.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And for a lot of people, it comes down to their own experiences, their beliefs about what's fair, how they see history.
It's interesting, just listening to you describe those different views, I can see both sides. It's complicated.
It really is, and that's why it's so important to talk about it, to try and understand where people are coming from, even if we don't agree.
So we've got this really complex situation, the U.S. taking a hard line on immigration, other countries pushing back, strong opinions on both sides. What does this all mean for the future? What are we doing with these policies?
That is the question, isn't it? And honestly, I don't know for sure. But there are a few possibilities worth thinking about. One is that this approach could backfire. Well, if the U.S. keeps being so aggressive, they could lose allies, create more instability in the region. They could even push more people into the hands of smugglers and traffickers. It could actually make the problem worse.
That's a scary thought.
Yeah.
So what else could happen?
We could see global power start to shift. As the U.S. becomes more isolationist, other countries might step in. They might form new alliances and partnerships, ones that don't line up with what the U.S. wants.
Oh, there's a whole geopolitical shakeup.
Exactly. And that could have big consequences for trade, security, even human rights around the world.
It's amazing to me how this one thing, this fight over deportation flights, has just opened up all these other issues. It's like a tiny version of all the challenges the whole world is facing.
I agree. It reminds us that we're all connected and that the choices we make, even seemingly small ones, can have huge impacts on people all over the world and for years to come.
Okay, wow. I think we've given everyone listening a lot to think about today. We started with this breaking news about a potential trade war, and we ended up talking about global power, the human cost of immigration policies, and what it means to be part of a global community.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting discussion, and it really shows how important it is to stay informed, to really think about these complex issues, and to try to understand the people whose lives are being changed by these decisions.
I couldn't agree more. So to everyone listening, we'll leave you with this weird conversation. What are your thoughts on using economics to influence immigration policy? Where do you draw the line between national security and treating migrants with dignity? What kind of world do you want to help build? Keep thinking, keep asking questions, and keep talking about these issues. This deep dive is far from over.
Sound the alarm. I'm coming up. We'll have a ball. I'm sweet like a buttercup. You're